The heavy scent of incense filled the dim underground chamber where the ritual was prepared. Yuki, bound tightly by rough ropes, struggled fruitlessly against his cold constraints. The cult leader stepped forward, chanting ancient verses from a leather-bound book. Yuki looked into the eyes of his own father, but found absolutely no mercy there. Several hooded figures lifted a heavy wooden barrel filled to the brim with murky water. The cold water poured over his face, cutting off his final desperate scream. His vision blurred into complete darkness as his lungs burned for oxygen. Suddenly, a brilliant light shattered the void enveloping his consciousness entirely. Yuki gasped for air as he sat up quickly on a bed of soft green grass. In the distance, towered a futuristic city filled with colossal, gleaming white structures. He examined his hands, realizing he had been reborn into a completely new body. A gentle young boy named Klen approached him, offering a hand of friendship. Alongside Klen was Allura, a sweet girl who welcomed him with a bright smile. They explained that this village was an isolation camp for those deemed useless by society. Yuki quickly discovered that no one in this strange world had ever heard of God. The very concept of religion had been systematically erased from human history. Months passed as Yuki settled into the quiet rhythms of farming life. He forged deep bonds with the villagers, sharing laughs around evening campfires. For the first time in his existence, Yuki felt genuine peace and belonging. That fragile tranquility shattered when a sleek imperial transport ship touched down. The villagers gathered in a panicked crowd as the ship's ramp lowered slowly. Heavily armored imperial soldiers marched out in perfect mechanical unison. An imperial official stepped forward holding a glowing holographic scroll. He loudly announced that this entire sector had been scheduled for end-of-life protocol. To the Empire, these innocent outcasts were nothing more than surplus liabilities. Cry of anguish erupted from the helpless villagers as they realized their fate. Yuki stepped in front of his friends, his heart hammering against his ribs. He demanded to know how anyone could execute innocent people without a trial. The official merely stated that the system's calculations were absolute and infallible. A soldier advanced forcefully, slamming the butt of his rifle into Klen's shoulder. Yuki lunged forward blindly, but was instantly pinned down by two heavy boots. He watched frantically as a firing squad formed a neat line before the weeping crowd. In this godless world, there was no divine intervention coming to save them. The modern technology of the Empire made resistance completely impossible for mere farmers. The commanding officer raised his hand slowly to give the final execution signal. Yuki closed his eyes, wishing with every fiber of his being for a miracle to occur. A sudden profound silence fell over the entire area, stopping the wind completely. The soldier's weapon suddenly flickered and lost power with a low electronic whine. A brilliant magic circle materialized on the ground, glowing with an ancient radiant energy. From the center of the light, a petite white-haired girl appeared, looking directly at Yuki. The brilliant aura pulsed outward from the center of the clearing, casting long dancing shadows across the damp grass. Yuki blinked repeatedly, rubbing his eyes hard to ensure the glowing white-haired entity before him was not a hallucination. Floating inches above the dirt, the tiny girl crossed her arms proudly and tilted her chin upward in a majestic posture. She opened her mouth to speak, but instead of a booming declaration, a small and squeaky voice echoed through the trees. The self-proclaimed deity announced herself as Mitama, the supreme goddess who had answered his desperate plea for salvation. Yuki slowly stood up, brushing the dirt off his trousers while staring blankly at her diminutive stature. The approaching heavy thuds of the Imperial executioner drones suddenly broke the brief moment of wonder. Pointing frantically at the approaching mechanical threats, Yuki commanded the goddess to destroy them with her ultimate divine wrath. Mitama smirked confidently, raising a tiny hand toward the sky as if summoning a catastrophic thunderbolt. Absolutely nothing happened, save for a gentle, pathetic breeze that rustled a few loose leaves on the ground. Her face instantly turned pale as she tried to summon her power again, straining so hard her cheeks turned bright red. Realizing they were sitting ducks, Yuki grabbed Mitama by her oversized collar and bolted into the thick undergrowth. The goddess flailed her legs wildly in the air, loudly protesting against such unceremonious and disrespectful treatment. They managed to slip into a concealed underground root cellar just as a heavy searchlight swept over the entrance. Yuki collapsed against the damp earthen wall of the cellar, panting heavily as the mechanical whirring faded in the distance. Sitting across from her, he demanded a straight answer as to why a literal god was completely incapable of fighting. Mitama slumped onto a wooden crate, her long white hair draping over her knees as she explained the cruel mechanics of her existence. Divine power in her universe was strictly proportional to the number of active devoted followers a deity possessed. Because the futuristic empire had completely eradicated the very concept of religion, her current follower count was exactly 0. Yuki rested his chin in his hand, his mind immediately racing through the psychological tactics of his father's old cult. If the villagers were forced to believe in her, her power would theoretically return and provide a shield against the empire. However, he knew that simply telling people to worship a strange girl would only make them think he had lost his mind. Religion required a foundation of miracles, and if true magic was unavailable, he would have to manufacture them using technology. The next morning, Yuki gathered the village elders in the central meeting lodge, presenting a detailed blueprint he had drawn overnight. The elders leaned forward, their wrinkled faces filled with utter perplexity at the strange diagrams of pipes and gears. Yuki explained that this design was a sacred agricultural engine revealed to him in a vision by the goddess Mitama. Standing right next to him on a small stool, Mitama puffed out her chest and nodded along, trying to look incredibly wise. One of the elders scoffed, pointing out that their soil was completely dead and no machine could magically conjure water. Yuki smiled confidently, declaring that the goddess would provide the water if they simply helped construct her holy apparatus. Desperate for any chance at survival, the capable villagers grabbed shovels and hammers, following Yuki's precise directions. For 3 straight days, Yuki supervised the construction of a hidden manual siphoning pump connected to a distant underground stream. Mitama sat under the shade of a nearby tree, lazily chewing on a blade of grass while watching the mortal sweat. Finally, the day of the grand demonstration arrived, and the entire isolation camp gathered around the strange wooden altar. Yuki stepped up to the platform, instructing everyone to close their eyes and voice their absolute allegiance to Mitama. Underneath the stage, hidden from view, 2 young boys frantically cranked the secret lever of the mechanical siphon pump. As the villagers timidly mumbled the goddess's name, a loud gurgling sound echoed through the hollow copper pipes. Suddenly, a massive geyser of clear, fresh water erupted from the altar's spout, showering the parched earth below. The villagers dropped to their knees in utter disbelief, cheering wildly at what they truly believed to be a divine miracle. At that exact moment, a genuine, blinding white light suddenly enveloped Mitama's tiny body from head to toe. Her white hair began to glow with intense cosmic energy, and her tiny stature radiated an undeniable presence of immense authority. Yuki watched from the sidelines, crossing his arms with a smirk as he realized his manufactured faith had unlocked actual godhood. With her newly restored strength, Mitama waved her hand, causing a lush carpet of green grass to instantly sprout across the mud. The entire population of the camp bowed deeply, chanting her name with an authentic fervor that fueled her power even further. Their joyous celebration was violently cut short as the sky above them suddenly warped into an ominous shade of crimson. A booming mechanical voice resonated from the heavens, declaring that an illegal ideological anomaly had been detected in the sector. Yuki's smile instantly vanished as he recognized the terrifying silhouette of an elite Imperial Archon ship emerging from the clouds. The high-tech warship deployed hundreds of armored suppression units that rapidly encircled the entire perimeter of their village. Mitama stepped to the front of the crowd, her glowing eyes narrowing as she prepared to test her newfound power against an empire. Suddenly, the ground beneath Yuki split open as a giant mechanical hand burst from the dirt, grabbing him tightly before anyone could react. The metallic finger's constriction tightened around Yuki's torso, lifting him completely off the damp earth. Mitama screamed his name as she lunged forward, her tiny hands glowing with a faint, flickering divine spark. Before the goddess could reach him, the mechanical arm retracted violently into a deep, geometric chasm that suddenly opened in the bedrock. Yuki plummeted through a vertical shaft lined with thousands of pulsing green data cables and ancient brass conduits. He landed heavily on a metallic grated platform that hummed with immense electrical power. Standing up, Yuki beheld a monolithic supercomputer terminal stretching miles into the subterranean darkness. A holographic projection of a mechanical eye flickered to life in front of him, speaking in a synchronized multitonal voice. The artificial intelligence revealed that the entire empire was merely a simulation managed by its core programming to prevent human extinction through absolute emotional control. Yuki realized that the godless world he had been reincarnated into was intentionally designed by this ancient machine to eliminate religious, unpredictable human behavior. The mechanical eye flashed a deep crimson, announcing that an anomaly like Mitama could not be permitted to distort the system's baseline parameters. Yuki declared that human hearts could never be fully quantified by a sequence of cold algorithms. A loud detonation echoed from above as the ceiling cracked open, showering the metallic chamber with rock fragments. Mitama descended through the smoke, riding on a construct of divine light she had manifested using the newfound faith of the villagers. She grabbed Yuki by his collar and pulled him upward, just as the security lasers of the AI targeted their position. They breached the surface, arriving back in the village square just as the mechanical chasm sealed itself shut forever. Their relief was short-lived as a sickeningly sweet aroma of lotus flowers began to waft through the night air. The villagers began stepping out of their homes. Their eyes glazed over with a strange, euphoric pink sheen. Floating above the village gates was Dakini, a rival archon adorned in golden silks and holding a staff that pulsed with hypnotic energy. Dakini laughed, her voice carrying a supernatural weight that made the listeners desire absolute submission to her beauty. Yuki watched in horror as his closest friends among the outcasts turned away from him, chanting Dakini's name in unison. Mitama stamped her foot, demanding that the fake goddess release the minds of her newly acquired congregation. Dakini explained that her authority over love and desire was an unyielding protocol designed to keep humanity blissfully compliant to the empire. As the brainwashed villagers began to advance on Yuki and Mitama with improvised weapons, Yuki knew he had to find a loophole in the AI's emotional programming. He recalled that in his previous life, cult indoctrination was always shattered when an authentic, overwhelming emotional frequency disrupted the manufactured one. Yuki grabbed a high-tech communication terminal from an abandoned Imperial supply crate nearby and rewired its audio amplifiers. He handed a crude microphone attachment to Mitama, telling her to sing from the depths of her genuine affection for this village. Mitama looked at the device, cleared her throat nervously, and began to hum a melody that resonated with pure celestial energy. The rewired speakers blasted her voice across the valley, transforming her simple melody into an earth-shaking anthem of true companionship. The pink mist began to dissolve rapidly wherever the acoustic waves of Mitama's song traveled. Several villagers stopped mid-stride, shaking their heads as the artificial euphoria left their eyes, replaced by genuine recognition. Dakini realized her hypnotic frequency was being systematically diluted by the raw emotional resonance of the music. She raised her staff high, conjuring giant lances of crystallized pink light to hurl directly at the makeshift sound system. Yuki leaped over the console, using his own body to shield the delicate audio wiring from the incoming magical projectiles. A crystal lance grazed his shoulder, shattering into burning shards that scorched his clothes and skin. Seeing Yuki hurt, Mitama's song reached a crescendo, her voice blending with the shared bonds of every outcast who had ever suffered under the Empire. A colossal sonic shockwave blasted outward, completely shattering Dakini's crystal staff into thousands of harmless sparkles. Stripped of her emotional manipulation tool, Dakini retreated into the clouds, vowing that the Supreme Archon would personally purge this rebellious sector. The music stopped, and Mitama collapsed into Yuki's arms, her divine energy severely depleted from the intense performance. The villagers gathered around them, bowing not out of technological programming, but out of genuine reverence for the goddess who had saved their souls. Suddenly, the entire night sky turned blood red as an ominous mechanical countdown clock materialized across the horizon, ticking down from 60 seconds. The blood-red sky pulsed with an unnatural rhythmic light as the mechanical countdown began its final descent toward zero. Yuki watched the crimson numbers flicker against the clouds while the ground beneath the village began to tremble violently. Mitama clutched Yuki's sleeve with trembling fingers as her small form flickered like a dying candle flame. From the distant horizon, a mountain-sized silhouette of the Archon Gaia rose slowly into the reddened heavens. The villagers scrambled in panic as the first of the Empire's drones descended to execute the end-of-life protocol. Yuki stood his ground and shouted for everyone to gather around the makeshift altar they had built for Mitama. He knew that without a massive surge of faith, the goddess standing beside him would be erased by the Imperial AI. Gaia let out a roar that shattered the glass windows of the nearby research buildings. Clarice and the other outcasts stopped running and looked toward Yuki's unwavering silhouette. Yuki began to recite the prayers he had invented, his voice cutting through the mechanical hum of the drones. One by one, the villagers knelt in the dirt and began to join their voices in a unified chant for survival. A soft blue luminescence began to rise from the people, drifting like spores toward the fading goddess. The Archon Gaia sensed the rising divine energy and began to charge toward the village with earth-shattering steps. Yuki drew a ritual blade and stood at the edge of the village, acting as a human shield for his people. He whispered a final plea to Mitama to find the strength hidden within the hearts of those who believed in her. Suddenly, Mitama's petite form exploded into a pillar of pure, blinding white light that reached the heavens. The red countdown in the sky cracked and shattered as the goddess's presence rewrote the local reality. Mitama emerged from the light in her true divine form, her hair flowing like a nebula across the dark sky. She looked down at the charging beast Gaia and raised a single finger toward the horizon. A wave of holy energy rippled outward, turning the ground from barren metal into a field of lush, green grass. Gaia shrieked as the nature magic forced the mechanical parts of its body to seize and rust instantly. The villagers cheered as the Imperial drones fell from the sky, deactivated by the overwhelming divine pulse. Mitama's voice echoed through the minds of everyone present, promising a world where they were no longer outcasts. Deep within the Imperial capital, the ancient AI processed this anomaly and began rewriting all remaining power to defense. Yuki looked up at his goddess, knowing that while this battle was won, the Empire still held the rest of humanity in its grip. The red sky finally cleared, revealing a beautiful sunrise that the villagers hadn't seen in years. Mitama drifted down from the sky and returned to her smaller form, though her eyes now held a permanent spark of divinity. She patted Yuki's head and thanked him for believing in a god who had forgotten her own name. Yuki gathered the village leaders and explained that they would now take the fight to the heart of the Empire. They began to retrofit the fallen Imperial drones with Mitama's holy seals to create a new kind of defense. The once broken outcasts were now a congregation of warriors ready to reclaim their freedom. Roy looked at the new greenery and wondered if the entire world could be restored to this natural state. Yuki promised that by the end of their journey, every human would have the right to choose their own destiny. Mitama sat on Yuki's shoulder, munching on a piece of fruit while watching the preparations for the final march. Yuki thought back to his previous life and realized that he had finally found a cause worth dying for. The screen faded as the small village army began their trek across the vast plains toward the glowing spires of the capital. The symbols of Mitama glowed on their banners, lighting the way through the gathering darkness of the world. Gaia's defeated form remained behind, now a mountain of flowers that served as a monument to the day a god returned. Yuki looked back one last time, seeing the lights of the village burning bright and steady in the distance. With the power of faith and the strength of his friends, the prophet of the godless world stepped forward into his new legend.